Hey everyone, thank you for joining us today. We're just going to give it a few more seconds so anyone in the waiting room has a chance to come in. Thank you all for joining us today for a really interesting webinar on eating disorders affect us all. I'm really happy that you joined us, and this is really an exceptional webinar. It's no slides, it's a personal story. I think everyone can gain a lot of knowledge and inspiration from it, and I'm so glad you're here. So we're going to get started. Just a few housekeeping rules to start. So the first is to please keep your cameras and your microphones off throughout the entire duration of the webinar. And also use the chat box to ask questions during the webinar. And I'm just going to ask here, please keep the chat box exclusively for questions. Because what happens is if there's a lot of side chat, which is interesting, the problem is that it's really hard to then for me to grab the questions from like a lot of chatter. So if you can just keep it just questions in the chat box, that would be great. And Stephanie's going to answer the questions at the end of her presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to let Stephanie get started, and I'm going to let her introduce herself so she does herself justice. So Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Am I starting?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Covington Armstrong. I am the author of the book, Not All Black Girls Know How to Eat, A Story of Bulimia. I am also someone who has survived and overcome anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder, orthorexia, exercise bulimia, body dysmorphia. I like to say that I've cycled through all of the eating disorders because I was a perfectionist, and I'm here to be able to tell you my story, which I always think is a little bit of it's a big miracle. Because when you're in the eating disorder, it feels your life, I'm going to say my life was so small and so controlled. And so I lived in so much fear. And 30 years later, I am still aware of how my eating disorder wants to show up. I feel 99% of the time like completely free of my eating disorder, but I am aware of it. And I think like that's one of the things that's been most helpful to me, is that I don't ever think that I don't ever think that like I didn't have an eating disorder. Like there's no denial about it. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, the third daughter of a single mom. I lived under the poverty line. My life looked different than my neighbors because inside my house, it looked like a library. Like we didn't always have a lot of food, but books were plentiful. Like books, knowledge, learning. I mean, those were very much the values in my house. And I want to say my mother was a little bit had undiagnosed mental issues, but she got diagnosed much later. But growing up was a little difficult. It was difficult because we were at a time and place where getting mental health support for anything was not acceptable. It was also very much unacceptable because I was Black and because we did not trust the mental health support system and doctors and professionals. So it was very hard to like kind of go past the strong Black woman archetype to deny everything that I was taught, which was we don't need help, we can do it ourselves, we're strong. And I was floundering at a certain age. At a certain age, I had a very traumatic event happen to me when I was 12 by someone my entire family trusted. It really shut me down. I feel like emotionally I left my body, and I was just like double fisting, trying to like just get, like deny that I was in pain, deny that I needed help, and deny like, no, I could do this myself. I don't need any help. And the way that started to express itself And I realize now there were other components, you know, there were other things that were happening in my life that also contributed. I had a very, like, I always like to say that if my mother knew that anything terrible had ever happened to me, she had the kind of energy, like she would have been in prison. Like my mother was very protective of her three daughters. So I never came from the feeling of not being heard, not being seen, not being listened to. I just felt very protective of my mother, and I understood of my of and I feel like that made me a little bit of a target because to I didn't want to, like when you see your parents dealing with so much, it's hard to become that one more thing. It's hard to become a problem. I had a sister who had other problems that were bigger and louder than mine. And so she took up a lot of the space. And because of that, when my relationship with food started to go sideways and started to be a problem, what I liked about it was I could hide in plain sight. I didn't have to um, announce it. No one knew. It was just like my little secret. So I started dabbling in, yo-yo dieting and oh, I'm not going to eat that, but I'm going to eat that. And like there started to become a lot of emotional exchanges in my head. I started doing like the counting in my head and the bargaining. Like if I do that, then I don't have to do that. If I eat that, then I can't. And then it it became normal. And I can also say, I also have a lot of happy childhood memories. It wasn't just one thing. It wasn't like, oh, it was just terrible. No, it was actually kind of, it, it's not just one thing. And so for me, being Black, being a woman, being in an underserved community, I felt like a freak. I felt so odd and so like there was nowhere I could go. And as an avid reader, I started to, this was actually right before I became bulimic. I had more of like anorexia at this point, and I started reading a lot. And I started reading every book that was written. And the one thing I knew was, and I noticed in all of the literature, is that no one looked like me and no one had my story. Like everyone's parents were immediately sending them to therapy, and they had a lot of support in a way that I didn't, because I could not share this. Also, I didn't understand it, so I didn't expect anyone else to understand it. And I didn't have some fantasy of being like a certain body size, right? Like my problem was in here. Everything that existed was in here. I look back at pictures, it was definitely in here. And I just wanted to control something. I couldn't control anything in the world around me. Um, I also had undiagnosed ADHD, which I got diagnosed with later, so I had a lot of anxiety but I also had this thing where in public, I just was okay. I was actually better than okay. I was funny, I was smart, I was charming. I could I had pizzazz, I could just like charm, but I was in so much pain. Like I call it the time where I had this dancing bear routine where I was like, oh, look over here. I'm doing like, but ultimately, I just felt so bad about myself and I was in so much pain and I didn't know how to get out of it. And that just led me further and further into the food because when I looked at life, there it wasn't like I could point to this was wrong or that was wrong or this is how. It was just, it felt very personal. It felt like this was my problem and I needed to fix it. And there was something wrong with me. And it took a long time for me to understand that I had actually had trauma that was untreated, and that I then turned on to myself, and I attempted to be perfect. And which if you knew me, you would just laugh, because it was like, I was kind of a hot mess, but I was also trying to be perfect and sparkly and just really as a cover. It was like my disguise. My disguise was I was Black. So no one ever suspected that I had my head in the toilet. I was normal size, like whatever that means. So like, and I smiled a lot, I smiled a lot. So it just like it kept anyone from looking at me and wondering, like, what's wrong with her? And as I got in my late teens and early 20s, I started to do something that happened to me as a child, which was we moved around a lot. We had a lot of movement. I grew up in New York City. We lived in every area of Brooklyn. And then suddenly that show got taken on the road, and we moved to the South for a minute. And then we moved back to Brooklyn. And so it was a lot of instability that way. Um, I was very close to my mother, but also like not close to her, because she really wanted me to be her twin, and I wasn't. And um so that was just very hard. It was very hard because I didn't know who I wanted to be, but I also knew that I wasn't exactly the same. And I was scared, I was lonely, I was sad. I felt like if anyone really knew me, that they wouldn't love me, that they would, like, the gig would be up. If I really showed people who I was, if I really exposed how badly I felt about myself and how unlovable I felt. So in my early 20s, I would get in relationships, and as soon as that person said the L word, I was like out. And I was doing weird things with food. I was going to the gym multiple times a day. I like to say that I lived my late teens and early 20s with roller skates on. Like, I was skating out of everything. I was constantly leaving a mess behind. No one could figure out, because no one would be like, well, she doesn't do drugs and she doesn't drink, and she like, but I had instability at my core. I was unstable, not mentally unstable, at least forward facing. Um, but I couldn't sit in my feelings. And so I was always trying to get out. I was always looking for something. Maybe this will help. Maybe this new diet would help. Maybe this new city would help. So it was a lot of movement, because ultimately I didn't understand that I needed to get therapy, that I needed to sit through the discomfort, that I needed to validate that I wasn't wrong for feeling the way I felt. That and I wasn't willing to let anyone help me, right? I wasn't willing to add this to the laundry list of things my mother was dealing with. I wasn't willing to go to my sister. I had a third sister who didn't was not the problem. She had other problems, but she was not the problem. And I also, in theory, was not the problem. I um took on my own independence really young. By the age of 19, I had a fabulous apartment in New York. I had a full-time job in corporate America. I was learning, like, I just was an over thriver in a way. Like, I overcompensated, and, had the perfect apartment, and I had a job that no one got at my age. And I was like, I'm going to, like, it's gonna, like, I just needed it to look good on the outside, because on the inside, I was dying. I was shrinking. My world was getting smaller and smaller. And then I finally, like, fell in love, which is something I had avoided. Like, I wanted people to love me, but the idea of loving someone back was impossible, because that would mean I had to show my vulnerability. and I had to show up. And when that didn't work, I was depressed, and I did the thing that I knew to do, which was I moved across the country with a place to stay and very little money, and then I started all over. So a lot of my story was just starting all over. I just kept starting over. I never finished things, which I did not know was also a part of my ADHD and um, my eating disorder. Like they were like linked, but it was also like I just couldn't sit still. I just couldn't finish anything. I went to like a guinea pig program in New York before I moved, and I for people with bulimia and anorexia, and I walked in and I was like, oh my God, this will fix me. And I just felt like a freak. I felt like no one understood, like that someone like me could suffer. And it took and I will say, here's something I learned in a recovery was a lot of people who don't look like me felt exactly like me, right? They felt like the purple two-headed giraffe. They felt unseen, unheard. And it wasn't that people didn't love me. It wasn't that people didn't try and hear me. It's just like there was something deep in my core that felt other and that felt separate and that felt broken. And I was so scared. And I didn't, these are not things that I could have put words to in my early 20s and late teens. These are not things I would have been willing to share because I had so much shame about what I now know was just being human. Like I had so much shame around my humanity because I just thought I was supposed to like make the least amount of noise, but make a lot of noise, be really quiet, but also be really like certain and ultimately just like not cause problems, right? Like not make my eating disorder anybody else's problem. And so that was so difficult for me. It was so difficult to be in pain and not share your pain. And I was like, the truth is, I was suicidal all the time because I wouldn't get close to the feelings. I wouldn't let anyone else in. I wouldn't listen. I- and because I kept thinking, well, you can't understand me. And even when I went into recovery, I was like, nobody can understand me. Like, I'm Black. I grew up under the poverty line. I don't have parents who are going to save me. Like, I don't like, I'm different. And it took a lot of time for me to see, like, holy shit, we're all the same. We're all struggling in some way with getting to the bottom of why we do what we do and of like loving ourselves enough to stop. And that's, ultimately that took professionals, which was a whole nother part of my recovery journey because I come from a place where you don't tell your secrets outside of your house. Like whatever is going on in your house, you keep in your house. Like you don't even tell your family outside of your house. I remember I had an aunt and she would say to me about her husband. She said, you never let the left hand know what the right hand is doing. I now know that's the most insane thing you can say to a child. Um, because of course you tell people. Of course you don't keep secrets. Of course you share with people who are safe and trustworthy and who have your back. But at that time, I couldn't. At that time, I was just like, I was an island. It was me against the world. It was like, and when people tried to help me, I thought they were trying to like ultimately give me a lobotomy. They were trying to change my, like, without my disease, I wasn't going to, like, I wasn't as funny. I wasn't as charming. I wasn't as interesting. like it literally merged with my personality, and I could not separate from it. And when people tried to separate me from it, it was like someone was trying to kill me physically, like physically. Um, because I and my disease were intricately linked. And like when I was working, I was waiting tables once, and I was the world's worst waitress, partly because I kept stealing food off people's plates and then going in the bathroom and stealing food. And I remember I was at this job, and one of the other waiters says, "Can you stop going in the bathroom and throwing up? Because I have to take care of your tables." I immediately quit that job. Like I just ran out of there, like because I was exposed. Because the anxiety of sitting, the anxiety of like my secret being out, the anxiety of just being different and being not okay was so much bigger. Um, so when I was about 22, I went back to New York and I was helping my sister. I was basically nannying for my sister. And her oldest daughter was about 10 or 11. And she said to my sister, you know, Auntie Stephanie throws up every day. She goes in the bathroom and throws up every day. And my sister, who, God bless her, knew nothing about eating disorders. Like it was not a known thing 25, 45 years ago, 40, whatever, in the Black community. Like we just didn't do it. Um, I once actually heard that on Oprah, and I was like wanting to pull out my hair because I know so many of us who were doing it. So when my sister confronted me, rather than admit that that I was bulimic and anorexic, and I literally just sat there and told her my deepest secret, which was what happened to me at 12. Not because I wanted to share my deepest secret. It was because I wanted to take the focus off of my eating disorder because I wasn't ready to quit it. So then it just became about I'm in so much pain because of this thing. It was a total manipulation tactic, but more than that, it was it was me protecting my eating disorder. Like it was me going, oh my God, like I'm gonna have to stop this. And I didn't know how. And I didn't want to at that time. Like, like it hadn't gotten bad enough to me. Now I look back and I was like, oh my gosh, I was doing that every day. Like that was terrible. But at the time, it wasn't what I would call my bottom, right? Like I was using it to stay above water. I was using my eating disorder to kind of control my self-loathing and my pain and my just self-hatred, right? Like it sounds crazy, but it was the one thing that kept me alive at a time because I didn't have any tools, I didn't have any help, I didn't have therapy, I didn't have anyone who understood me. I didn't have a way out. And so then, because my sister found out about my eating disorder, it was a perfect time to move back to California, where I could then be unsupervised. So I moved back to California, and my eating disorder continued to run rampant and do, someone always says it like it was doing push-ups. It was like it was out of control. I was working two jobs. No, I wasn't waitressing anymore because that felt really dangerous for me. Um, and then one day I was watching this. Okay, this is aging me. Parents will understand. I was watching a TV movie, and and it was about someone with bulimia. And at the end of it, it said, if you are someone or you know someone struggling with this, here are ways to get help. I like that had never happened to me. I mean, I had been through programs. I had been through like this hospital program in New York. I had tried other things. But it was almost like a light bulb went off. And within a day or two, I had called this place. I had looked for these free meetings around food. I walked in, I sat in the back, I listened to people talking, and I was still like, these are all white people. They do not understand. They're rich. Their parents bought them BMWs. They don't like in my head, I was always looking for something to make me so different so that I could be the one person with this disease who is unhelpable, unfixable, and I was unhinged, apparently. So but in every week, I would go back and I would sit in the back and I would immediately leave and I would find all the food and I would do all the things, but I just kept going back. And then one day, and then I saw a couple other Black people, but they were also, to me, chocolate versions of the other people. And then one day, this woman got up and talked, and she was blonde hair, blue eyed. She grew up in Harlem. She was also a writer like me. She talked about her story. And I was like, I sat there with my mouth hanging open. And I was like, I know you. Like, that's my story. And that was the beginning of me getting help. That was the beginning of me not feeling alone and not feeling like an isolated purple giraffe. Like I suddenly saw myself in someone who did not look like me, who did not come from where I came from, but who also grew up poor, also grew up feeling like an outsider, also grew up with parents who had a lot of trauma and who did not want to add to it. And I started to seek help. And it was like my eating disorder and personality were so merged that it was like it was like gummy. It was glue. Like I had to get in there in the little windows that would occur and like look for like have my listening ear out. So I was like, okay, I could do that. And I had people saying, do this, do like I was a child. I was a 20 something year old and I had to learn how to reparent myself. I had to learn how to just like I remember having to like call someone 3 times a day and go, okay, I'm about to eat this. And then like call them back and go, I ate this. And then like not eat in those in between times. And I had to, it, if you like, I did not understand how me, a strong Black woman, like a strong Black woman archetype, like I came from a family that never got mental health support, that never had help, that most of them didn't even need men. They didn't need anything. But they also had nervous breakdowns and like the whole family rallied and took care of them, but no one talked about those things. And and I remember calling my mother and saying, I'm in therapy. And my entire family was like, if you're not walking around on a corner talking to yourself, if you are not deemed mentally unstable by, you know, a professional, if you do not warrant a psych ward, then we don't understand what you're talking about. And I felt so lonely. And I felt so much shame that, unlike everybody else, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do life without help. And I thought something was really wrong with me, because my mother didn't need help. My sisters didn't need help. My aunts didn't need help. My grandmother didn't need help. But did I want to live at the level that they lived at, in terms of they all could have used some mental health support. So when I first went to therapy, it was so hard. And then I started feeling completely bamboozled. I started feeling like, why was I raised to believe that this was outside of the realm of possibility for me? That needing mental health support was negative. Like, the idea that someone was going to spend 50 minutes talking to me, helping me talk through things, helping me to understand the why, like to understand my brain, to understand my habits and my. I just want to pause for a moment to understand what it means to grow up believing that this was something that weak people needed. This was something that other people needed. This was something that was like a crime against my own people for me needing it. Thankfully, today is different. Thankfully, all the girly pops who look like me are in recovery, or who don't have eating disorders are very pro therapy. That life has changed. But during my, early years, that was not true. I felt like an island. And the more I leaned into recovery, the more I leaned into like unpacking things that I didn't even know were trauma, like my perfectionism, my need, that was a trauma response, that like needing, like if I wasn't great at something, I just didn't do it. Like I didn't have a parent who was like, oh, yes, soccer. Yes, you might not be athletic, but maybe do it to be part of a team for 1 year. Maybe try this thing. It's okay if you're not perfect. Like, like I feel like my parent learned after I learned, and that was really helpful, you know. But like we only do what we can based on the information we have in front of us. And so it gave me a lot of compassion as I went on my recovery journey. Like at first I was just angry and annoyed and a handful and rageful, and I had a lot of feelings, and they were everywhere, and they were like weapons. And and then and then it kind of evened out. I evened out. I my eating disorder, and it wasn't that I suddenly like gave up my eating disorder and I was like, "Woo, I'm free." I still had this very troubled relationship with food. I was afraid of foods. There were things I could not imagine eating. I, in recovery, started being orthorexic and being very like, oh, I can only eat like this because this is healthy. And that, like, so in my recovery, I cycled through a lot of different versions, but I wasn't throwing up. I wasn't compulsively eating, and I wasn't starving myself. So that was my first level of recovery, which was, oh, and then recovery became no negative self-talk, only being around people who are team Stephanie, right? Um, no, perfectionism. Like I remember when I quit perfectionism, it was like leaving my favorite like lover, right? Like suddenly I was allowed to fail. I was allowed to do things in a way that I might fail at. I was allowed to take chances. I was allowed to um, do things that scared me. And I have a very good friend who used to always say, if you polish over here, it'll shine over here. So the more I worked on my relationship with myself and food, the more like my life got bigger. Like I had more friends. I was able to have a relationship. Um, I mean, I remember going to my therapist one day and going, okay, the food thing is good, which meant I was starting to try foods that scared me. I was no longer focused on controlling and perfectionism. And I walked into my therapist and I go, okay, now I want to learn how to be intimate. And that might sound funny, but like at the core of everything and believing I was broken, I would have never trusted like another human being to get very close to me. And so I had intimacy issues. And like that's one of the things that got solved in my recovery. It wasn't just my recovery with food. I was able to go back and fix some relationships that I had really damaged because I lied, I cheated, I stole, I was not trustworthy. And I was someone who, you know, sometimes people, literally would cross the street because I was so full of it. And I would just, I remember when I first started um, with someone who helped me with my food, and I would lie. I would be like, oh, I'm going to have 2 pieces of this, and I'd have 1.5 or 3. But it was like, that was part of my protective mechanism, was like, don't let anyone close enough to know you. Don't let anyone in. And, I look back and it's like, I don't know that my mother could have done anything differently. Like, I don't know how this works, right? I don't know, like, I do know that having support, like having people I could talk to about it, having a community that gets this, because the one thing I learned in recovery is it's not up to the people in my life to understand my disease. It's up to them to just love me, right? And to support me and to, when I am, you know, like a little bit off, to like go, hey, you know, are you okay? Do you need to talk? Do you need to talk to your therapist? What is it you need? Like, like I needed to be handled with kid gloves initially. Like I did. I was so like tender and I was so vulnerable and so fragile when I first um went through recovery that I was like a throbbing like mess. And it took a while for me to lean in and to love myself and to do the work and to come out of the other side. And I've always had a part of me that was very strong and very certain. And eventually, like who I was underneath all of that other stuff and my disease got to like rise and come to the forefront. And I got to be more of a leader, which I always had the propensity for, but I had to like get, out of my way. And I remember I once had one of the people in my life who helped me through my disease say, we're all like a glass that's compacted full of like all the lies and shame and pain, and every time you tell the truth, every time you share, like what's really going on. You scoop out a little bit of that and make more room. And that's what I've done with my life. And that's what I've done by like sharing my story, by telling my story, and by walking. It is no joke. Like it's like walking through the fire. And there's a reason that people just describe eating disorders as taking the lion out of a cage and walking it through 3 times a day. Because when your addiction is food and you still have to eat to live, it's hard. It's harder to me. It's the only disease I've ever had. It's the only addiction I've ever had, but it's a beast. And I am someone who never, I would meet people and they would be like, yeah, I think I have 5 years of recovery. And I was like, oh, that like that doesn't happen to people like me. Like people like me never get there. Like it wasn't even aspirational. It was impossible. It was like me and other people. Other people got to recover. Other people got to live these great lives. Other people got to um like thrive. I was going to be stuck in this web of pain and brokenness and and shame, and like I was always going to be someone who worshiped my toilet. I was always going to be someone who lied, who cheated, who stole, who couldn't be trusted, who couldn't be counted on, who like who was always going to be like, oh, poor me, I have this thing, I'm in pain, don't, no one can help me. That was going to be my story. I was going to die on that hill. And so here's me today. I have over 30 years of recovery. I had a very intense relapse 14 years in. I went through just a horrible divorce that caused a lot of shame and pain, um and I didn't think I would make it to the other side of that. And it was so humbling to be like a beacon of light and suddenly I'm back in it. And part of it is I was a little arrogant. Like all the people who were part of my support team, my friends who were my recovery friends, I had just kind of like, I don't need that. So today, I have a ton of recovery friends. I have a ton of friends who have no addiction at all. I am a mother of a 24-year-old who just landed in Berlin. She like I have a nephew whose mom passed when he was 4, and now he's a sophomore. Nope, he's a freshman at Vassar. I'm a parent and a half. I have friends who trust me, who depend on my wisdom. I have friends I depend on. When I'm afraid and lonely and scared, I have people I can talk to. I am friends with my ex-husband. I um I always try and choose the thing that's best for my children. I am not an airy fairy parent. I'm a little tough, but I love myself. Um, Everyone in my life is Team Stephanie. So when I do something ridiculous, I have people that will pull my coat and go, "Mm." I apologize to my kids to be all the time. Like I get things wrong constantly. Um, I'm the opposite of perfect, and my life is amazing because I've done a lot of work to get here, and it's not perfect. It's far from perfect, but I would not change anything. And I am so grateful for where I am and the journey I took. And I do know that for everyone listening, this is possible for the people in your life. Because if it could happen for me, if I can get to the other side of this, it was not easy. I don't ever want people to think it was easy, but it is possible. It can happen. I will say it every day. If I can recover, recovery is possible. So thank you for letting me share my story. I look forward to your questions. I'm absolutely here and ready to just add whatever I can to the conversation.
Thank you so much. That was wow. That was really incredible. I'm going to start off the questions and hopefully other people will follow in the chat box. I wanted to ask you, for the most part, we're a community of parents and caregivers. And you were talking about not being able to connect with people, during your illness. As parents, we feel that disconnect. And it's so difficult for us because we love our kids so much and we want to find ways to reconnect with them. So what advice would you have for parents whose kids are in the throes of an eating disorder and they're barricaded off and they've isolated themselves and you're trying to reach your kid? How would you think the best way would be for us as parents to do that? And what messages should we be sharing with our kids to show them our love and our support?
Okay, so the first thing, yay, parents. Like any parent who is traveling with their child through an eating disorder, I am so proud of you because this is hard. This is the hardest thing you will ever deal with. I don't know if anything's harder. There may be, but from my point of view, this is the hardest. So first of all, like, you're amazing. Okay. Your kid is going through something that even they don't understand. So first of all, knowing you're there, it's like, even if you're in the next room, even if they rage on you, even if they are like completely shut down, when you can, pat their back, when you can, just like, there's something about physical touch, even when, but be very respectful of their space, right? Like, don't hover, because they're on their own timeline. And one of the things that's most scary is them feeling the pressure of doing it on your timeline. And I, even if you absolutely don't do that, I am saying that it's the voices in the eating disorder head, right? So just always like, I'm here. Like if you have any issues with food, also address those, right? Like, a lot of parents don't. If you do, address yours, because your child is going to look to you and for you and at you. Okay. This is not a causation, right? We don't like, my mother had some issues with food. She didn't cause this. My sisters, they don't have this. So I'm just saying, like, take the guilt off, because that's not helpful. All you can do is let your child know you're there. Try and invite fun into your life, whatever that is, whatever they'll do. Oh, do you want to watch a movie? Do you want to go for a walk? Like, maybe things that don't surround, because they have to eat. So whatever that relationship is that you have with them around food, that's just your parenting, right? That's you trying to keep your kid alive or safe, right? So the ways that you connect, or they may be new. You want to do a puzzle. Hey, come in, like, hey, you talk about something that has nothing to do with anything, right? Like, just anything. Like, oh, did you see that outfit? What do you think of those pants? Like, like anything, really. Like, oh my God, there's this new TV show. Do you want to watch it? Like, anytime you can, like, there's always these micro gaps. And what you're trying to do is just slide into a micro gap. You don't know where they will be, okay? Because it's a minefield. So just know that. But just try and slide into the gaps, right? And the way to do that is to always, even if you're frustrated and scared, just like smile and be like, hey, I'm here. Do you want to do this? You may ask your kid 10 days in a row, hey, do you want to go for a bike ride? Do you want to go for a walk? Do you want to go watch a movie? Do you want this? And that 12th day, they may say yes. So don't give up. That's what I can say. Just don't give up, because they're listening, and it is penetrating. okay? And try to find your own support for your own anxiety around this, which is one of the things Feast is here for. So, because if you can come to them with as little of your anxiety, it actually will just leave a little more room and maybe add a little more space to the gap because you're just trying to slide in the gaps. Okay.
That's a really good point. We actually just released a skills program about 2 months ago, and one of the skills is distress tolerance skills. And I think that's so critical for parents because, watching your child suffer is hugely distressing, and it ramps up your anxiety. And
Totally.
giving parents the skills to be able to help themselves so they can help their kid is really critical. If you people don't ask questions, I'm just going to keep talking. So meanwhile, I just wanted to say that what really struck me was when you were talking about the meeting and you were talking about, the person who was speaking and how you were able to finally, see your story in someone else, even someone else who didn't look like you. And I just wanted to comment, I think that's one of the most amazing things to me about the F.E.A.S.T community. Being that we're global, and there are parents from all over the world, and there are different cultures and races and religions. And what always strikes me is the ability to form a community and the ability to find these commonalities between us. And I think it's a beautiful thing. I really do. And I think that, that's really important, to be able to, you know, see yourself in other people, to be able to find what you share with other people, and to be able to connect with other people. Ultimately, I think your story to me really is one of finding connection. And once you were able to find that connection, then being able to find your path to recovery. I did want to ask you, you did talk about, the experience of being at that meeting and kind of coming to a realization. I think what parents really want to know from people who recover is kind of what was that aha moment, or what was that process of, okay, now I'm going to, put myself on the path to recovery? Because as you said, you were someone who, at the worst points of your illness, you didn't feel like you had this hope in your recovery. So where were you able to find the hope that, okay, after so long in being immersed in this illness, you were able to pick yourself up and move forward? Where did that, yes, where did that strength come from? Where did the inspiration come from? What was that moment that you decided that you were going to leave the eating disorder behind, even though you said it gave you so much, and you said that separating yourself from it, you thought you were going to die? So it took a lot of courage to be able to separate yourself from it. So I'm just curious as to what was going on in your head, in your heart, kind of what really contributed to your recovery.
So, there's a saying that I'm sure all the parents have heard, which is, you know, when you get sick and tired of being sick and tired. So I think part of it was I was emotionally, mentally, and physically exhausted. Like I had tried everything, every shortcut, every, sorry for saying this word, diet, every every solution, every, it was like the last house on the block. Like I had no, like it was like I like had to throw up my hands because I was not going to, like, there was enough hope that I knew I wanted to live. And I was willing to transcend my own fear. And there just came a moment where I was just like, is this it? Like I started to think about my life in the future. And, I had someone very close to me spend their entire lives doing drugs, like from 16 till like their entire lives. And I just had a moment in my own self where I just was tired. I was tired of my head constantly spinning with stories of being broken and unfixable and, this is your fault. And like, it was just like there was a loop. And so I would also encourage parents, anything that's uplifting or inspiring. I'm not talking about religion, but I'm talking about like stories of hope that have nothing to do with eating disorders. If you can find movies, like just like those things outside of us that'll give us hope, like anything uplifting is really good for like the eating disorder brain, you know, um, just to constantly, and for me, it was just a moment of how long could I go on like this? How long could I survive this? And, you know, and I'm so proud of this parent group because your kids have such a great chance because community is what got me through. I started to build a community of people who were in recovery, and I started to see all of these people who had marriages and kids and careers, and I was still in my disease, but I started to go places where I was in recovery and where people had recovery, and that's what helped me is I started to see the possibility.
Okay, thank you. That's quite the answer. We have two questions. I hope we have time for both. Did you find as you started to nourish yourself that your mindset started to improve? Like, did you notice, as you stopped the behaviors and as you stopped restricting and as you started to normalize your eating, did you notice a difference?
Absolutely. Absolutely. My skin, like from physical skin to like being able to hear when people spoke. Like I would go to restaurants and or out with friends, and I was in here. I wasn't even present. I was like, oh, how much of that can I eat? And I was the math. I was like, so yes, everything changed. Absolutely.
And final question. Can you talk a bit more about your breakup with perfectionism? I also thought that was really interesting, the way you phrased that. I'm trying to get my son to think less about performance and more about purpose and breaking free from fear of other people's opinions.
Oh, one of the hardest things you'll ever do, but one of the best things you can do. So I realized that like there was always going to, and this was humbling. There was always going to be someone smarter, funnier, prettier, thinner, blah, like the list was so long, but there was never going to be anyone with my exact um makeup, right? Like there was only going to be one of me. And the more I leaned into like being one of me, and also I couldn't be perfect. Like it was like I was setting bars I could never reach. So it was like the dangling carrot. It was me living with this carrot. And I started to realize, okay, I have to say this, but I started to realize that when I was around people who were really, really perfectionists, I didn't enjoy it. Like I didn't enjoy being a, around perfectionists because it was just exhausting. And it didn't feel authentic. It felt it felt like trying. And I was like, oh, that's what I'm doing. So I started to see myself in other perfectionism and not like what I was seeing. Um, and and just be like, there's a lot I'm just good enough at, or things I'm terrible at. But breaking up with perfectionism really meant that I got to just be human. And that's what I didn't understand. I'm still fabulous. Like I was like, oh, you still get to be, but I don't have to pretend anymore or want something that's just like unobtainable and that's going to always make me feel bad about myself.
It's really amazing that you had the insight to get there, um, because I think a lot of people don't. And I think that definitely enabled you to recover, and also enabled you to be happy, like
Oh yeah.
really, really happy, and to find the
Yeah, I'm
joy.
really happy.
And
I'm
I
really
it shows. Yeah, I mean, you really shine, and I'm so, so appreciative that you joined us here today. This was truly fascinating. I've heard your story before, Hearing it again, it was just a different nuance and, you know, kind of a different perspective. So I know that parents found this incredibly helpful in giving them insight into their own kids and into the illness. And you offered a lot of hope for parents out there who don't have a lot of hope and who need that hope. So thank you so much. I just want to end by asking everyone here today, Feast is run on the generosity of the people in our community. If you have the capability to donate, please go to our website. And there's a donate button right on the home screen. Just donate what you can to enable us to keep offering educational programming like this free of charge for everyone. And I do just want to end with our next webinar. Next month is going to be really interesting. Treating eating disorders with psychedelics, a guide for parents. I personally find this topic fascinating. I think a lot of parents do. It's new research. It's a totally new area of treatment. It is showing some promise. And I brought 2 experts in next month to talk about it with us. So thank you again so much, Stephanie. Thank you everyone for joining.
And also, if anyone wants to, can you hear me?
Still there.
Okay, anyone, you can go, my website is stephaniecovingtonarmstrong.com if you have any more questions.
Great. Thank you so much. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.